So, Bill, give us a little bit of background about what you were doing before and really what sort of led you to this new position.
Sure. Well, good morning, everybody. It's great to see a lot of faces that I haven't seen in 2 years, since I started working with LDX. I had spent, if you kind of go to the Wayback Machine, I had spent almost 30 years in corporate roles. I think, Wendy, you and I probably worked together for about 15 or 20 of those. Transitioned out of that in 2017, joined Beacon, did a bunch of consulting work. It was enjoyable sort of up till COVID when things started to slow down considerably. And I also came to the conclusion then that I wanted to take sort of another spin. I wanted to go back into an operations role. While consulting is great, at the end of the day, they don't have to do what you're asking them or suggesting that your clients do. And I was actually just about to buy a small manufacturing company at the end of 2020 in New Jersey. Did not make my wife very happy because it came with a personal guarantee. But it was probably a good chance for us. We were backed by a private equity company out of California. So it was a good chance for us to get back into the operations role and really have a chance to build a business. And then just before, I think it was right between Thanksgiving and Christmas, I got reached out by a headhunter about this opportunity with LDX, and it moved very, very quickly. And the fit seemed to be good. It sort of met my interest in getting back into an operations role, into a leadership role. And as I said before, it made my wife Kiku much happier that we're not on the hook personally to the bank. So the industries that LDX serves were very familiar to me, and the nature of the business was sort of very familiar to me from past experience. So it seemed to be a very good fit at the time.
And give us a bit of background, Bill, in terms of what LDX does.
Yeah, so we're primarily an environmental company. We have three business lines. One supports renewable fuels, primarily wood products, as well as building products. Our biggest unit is focused on air pollution control. So we deal with a very, very wide range of pollutants, whether that's dust, acid gas, hazardous air pollutants, mercury, VOCs, et cetera. And so we are sort of the tailpipe for a really wide range of industrial processes. And we also have a division that helps reduce water consumption in pulp and paper. When you look at the pulp and paper industry, they are a huge consumer of fresh water. I was at a plant in North Carolina about 18 months ago. They use 13 million gallons a day of fresh water. And we have technology that helps them to recycle more effectively the water inside the plant and reduce their consumption of fresh water. So really, we've got three legacy companies, all of them focused on supporting environmental remediation and pollution control. It's a project-based company. We've got operations in Georgia, Redmond, Washington, Eugene, Oregon, Ruston, Louisiana, as well as in Spain.
And as you went through the sort of recruitment process, what was the sort of due diligence that you were doing from your side?
Well, as I said, the process moved really, really quickly, and the timing for us was great. So, when we looked at it, I said I probably spent a fair amount of time looking at sort of the high-level financials, looking at some of the key metrics in the business, but also spent a fair amount of time engaging with the investors, because that's the most important relationship that you're going to have. They ultimately own the company. So it's really important to understand how they like to work together with portfolio companies and with leadership of portfolio companies. What does it look like when things are going well? What does it look like when things are not going well? Also understanding a little bit more about where they stand as far as the timeline for the portfolio company. How close to exit are they? What are their plans for exit? What are their targets? So kind of between those two, high-level financial review, getting to know the investors a little bit better. And I probably was negligent in not digging enough into the company itself, because I thought that I knew more than I probably did know, based on past experience.
So just on that, I mean, what do you wish you had of us that you didn't ask, or with hindsight?
Yeah, well, I think a lot. The company was hit very hard by COVID. The nature of the business is it's industrial projects. So they're large capital value, long sell cycle. You're talking about project pipelines that are 18 to 24 months between when you first hear about it till they're placing orders. And then it takes typically 12 to 18 months to get through project execution. So, during COVID, a lot of the projects were delayed. Not a lot of new projects were being placed. And while I sort of understood that at a high level, I didn't really dig into some of the softer things. So what were the specific impacts on the company due to COVID? What did attrition look like? How's the organization set up? How have they dealt with that? And some of those other topics would probably have been more helpful for me to dig into earlier in the process. And also digging into the financials, and really understanding the situation at day one. Right before I joined the previous CFO, I found out the previous CFO had just left. And so it would have been better for me to ask more questions around sort of why, and also kind of what is the liquidity situation on day one? What is the backup that will be there? What is the what is the litigation status, right? So there was a bunch of things that, if I were to do this again, I'd probably ask some better questions on those two areas.
And would any of that have changed your mind, or do you think you still would have taken the plunge?
No, probably not. I think it just would have, I had a vision when I looked at starting, and this would have recalibrated that vision a little bit more. But I don't think it would have made any difference. It just would have helped to sort of set the priorities on day one. And I just file that in the lessons learned. I've often said that someday I'm going to write a book, and there are going to be some colorful chapters in there. I think this is going to be a very successful chapter at the end of the day, but probably would have done deeper due diligence at the beginning.
So when you sort of landed there, what were your sort of initial priorities, and how did that sort of play out?
Yeah. So, if I were to look at sort of, first thing is always kind of who is the leadership team? What are the skill sets that they have? What are the competences that they have? Are they suited for the work that they're doing? Are they engaged in the work that they're doing? Do they play well with others, or do they sort of run with scissors? And really looking at how they work together, how much accountability they have in their individual areas. Focus on customer engagement. How do we stand with our customers? Do we have a large pipeline of work? Are they satisfied? Are we on time with the projects? Do we have a good reputation or a challenged reputation? And then dig into the sales pipeline, looking at the project status, looking at some of the execution discipline. Are we meeting our goals? Are we meeting our commitments? And then continue to then sort of pivot to growth. So that, leadership team, customers, pipeline, project discipline, and pivoting to growth. It was sort of how I had pictured, the key initiatives would be when I started on day one.
And what was the reality?
Yeah, well, I think that the first reality was, when the CFO had left, and I never knew him. Job number one was finding a new CFO, and so I joined in, I guess it was January of 2021. So it's a little bit more than 2 years ago. And so recruiting a new CFO, getting through the 2020 close, getting through the 2020 audit, addressing some sort of litigation issues that were hanging around. I mean, those were sort of that became the first and foremost topic. I kind of had a good sense at that point of where we stood project-wise, but I really didn't understand some of the cultural impacts. Questions around who had left during COVID, right? Who was still with the organization, who had left, what had attrition looked like? I didn't realize that most of the sales team had quit in 2020. Many of the engineers had quit in 2020. The company had gone through, probably what were some really necessary changes and downsizing during COVID. But then, when you kind of look at it with fresh eyes and you see how many people have moved away and they were never going to return to the office, and sort of as a project business, and maybe I'm just old school, but as a project business where you're really relying on others on your teams, that's a lot of face-to-face time. That's hard to do remote. It's hard to get commitment from folks. to get things done by a certain deadline if you're not sort of eye to eye. And again, I could be old school in that regard. The morale of the company, and oftentimes when we talk about morale, we talk about folks down in the trenches. For this situation, it was also sort of the morale of the leadership team. They had been working hard to keep the company together during COVID, and they were tired. They were, they were a little bit challenged by some of the things that they had been through, and there wasn't a lot of sort of collaboration or cohesion between them. So, when we talk about, I've always thought that getting the right team in place early is one of the critical things to do, and that was, that became a real priority to assess kind of where are we with those team members. What are their strengths? Where are they kind of challenged? And if they can't work together, why? And then what are we going to do about it? LDX is a legacy of 3 previous companies, and there hadn't been any integration between the 3. So we were running different accounting systems, different project management systems. Everybody was tied to sort of the history of the predecessor companies. And if you've ever been part of a company that's been acquired, you know exactly how that feels. So really working through some of those topics was critical. And then, getting back in front of customers and understanding where had we succeeded. And there were a lot of places where we had succeeded, sort of what were some of the challenges that were out there. And what would we need to address as we sort of went forward. There were some really, there were some positive surprises too. We did, as we looked at the organization, we did find a number of people sort of lower down in the organization that were ready to take a challenge and were ready to step up into new roles and could bring some fresh energy, which was great to see. You always want to see, folks with ambition that want to take on new roles and want to take on new responsibilities, was sort of open to the idea of change and growth. And our equity partner came through very, very strong. As we faced difficulties, we had, over the past couple of years, we've had liquidity issues, we've had earnings targets and covenant issues, right? I mean, so in any sort of turnaround, you're going to face those challenges. Equity partner was very, very strong in supporting us through those challenges. They were willing to support an acquisition, which has really been a very, very positive impact on the company. But that was happening right at sort of some of our darkest times. So you
made an acquisition as part of that, Bill? Or?
Yep. In 2021, we purchased a company called Western Pneumatics, which had been a supplier, but also was a key player in the wood products industry. And wood products industry has got pieces it's everything from 2x4s up to structural, architectural lumber. But a key part of that business today is renewable fuels. It's pellet fuels. It's how do as countries specifically in Europe or Asia that are looking to as their energy supplies have been challenged and they're going back to having to fire coal, the use of wood pellets is a great alternative for that because it's renewable. And so this company that we purchased in 21, key player in that field. And so that was very nice to bring that on board. It fit within the portfolio really well. And it actually helped us to regain some momentum with some of our key customers. And it was, but I would say, and I, from my perspective, it looked like a great idea, but I would imagine, from the investor's perspective, you always look at those sorts of things and say, is now the right time? Is this the right place to be deploying money? And they supported it. There were a lot of questions, but they supported it. And it's turned out to be very, very positive for the company. So there has been, there was sort of this balance. There's should have done better diligence up front. It probably wouldn't have made a difference in taking the role. And then, once I came on board, that's when I found out a lot of those things that I probably could have asked better questions about.
Yeah. And you mentioned that historically been a sort of lack of integration. So is that something you've managed to successfully address, or is that sort of ongoing?
Yeah. Like many companies or groups of companies, when you pull them together, you really have to make a decision whether you're going to operate as sort of 3 or 4, however many legacy companies, or if you want to stitch it together into one cohesive company. And we made the decision in 2021 that we were going to change that structure. And so our individuals would be less tied to the legacy company that they came from, less tied to the organization and the location that they came from. And we reorganized the company so it was focused really on industry segments. So we took, we have now an air pollution control segment, we have a pneumatic conveying segment, we have a process system segments, which deploy technology into direct markets. And it doesn't matter which sort of legacy company you came from or where you happen to sit, right? We've organized along those business units, and we've integrated our manufacturing and our installation crews. And that's given people a greater link between what they do and the financial results of the company. So that was sort of at a high level, is reorganizing so that we're not defending the company that you came from. And it's more saying, as we go forward and build this business, sort of, how do I contribute to the success of the business? Because otherwise, and certainly in my previous life, we were bought by a big competitor. You're always fighting because every day it feels like you're giving something up to the mothership. And so, getting through that wall and helping to make sure that people feel connected to the goal of the company and how they feel successful, how they can contribute to that success was important. And then we have to work with all of the other topics. We had to consolidate accounting systems. We had to consolidate project management skill sets and procurement and logistics. There was a lot of sort of the mechanics that had to be done once we made that shift on the integration. But and I think that there's many different ways to get to that point. For us, we just decided to rip the Band-Aid off and just launch into it.
So did you set up a special project, or how did you go about that? Did you have
no, I think
someone in charge of that integration? Or?
Yeah, we kind of called it the Big Bang, right? We said on January 1st, 2021, this is how 2022, sorry. This is how we're organized. This is, the part of the business that you're in. This is how you engage with the success of the business. Of course, there were 1,000 questions that followed that, but it was one that we had tried to move in the direction softly in 2021. And you sort of run into institutional roadblocks, and you run into folks that don't necessarily see how a new organization helps, it was true, I think, in almost every organization. So with the COO and the CFO, we just rolled out a new organization and worked it down through all but the lowest level of the organization charts, and then rolled that out in beginning of 2022. And I think as we've wrapped up 22 and we're working our way into 23, that organization, I think, it's going to prove to be very, very positive in our ability to make a difference.
And where do you see the sort of evolution of the company? It sounds like there was a fair amount of distress when you sort of landed. You've started the reorganization. Ultimately, I'm sure the equity owners are looking at an exit. So where are you in that journey in terms of the timing of the exit and in terms of the things that need to be sort of achieved to get to that exit?
So we are getting a little bit long in the hold period. So I'm sure that our financial backers are looking at a transaction in the near future. The key that I've sort of the way that I look at it is it's more important for us to build a great company. There's a certain level of support. How do we get through a future transaction, which isn't too far off? But when you look internally, the key for everybody that's engaged is not to talk about that process. It's to continue to build a great organization, get the right people in the right seats, sort of make your customers happy, grow the business, and then the transaction happens in the background. But if you can't do the first part right, if you can't hit your financial numbers and show growth and have a solid pipeline and engaged customers, then a transaction becomes very, very difficult. So, that's really where the leadership team and I are focused right now is how do we make sure we get to that point?
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, it's sort of an incomplete answer.
So you're really focused on the business and just improving the business, knowing that at some point a transaction is going to just evolve and happen.
Yeah. It's you sort of never know. But our goal is to get to the point when we're ready, we're gonna have a long line of suitors that are ready to come look at the company and sort of kick the tires, and who could we be a good fit with going forward. And reality that helps to keep all of our folks engaged with what they're working on.
Yep.
So it's not a perfect answer, but that's.
Yep, I understand. And what do you sort of view as your sort of biggest achievement to date?
Yeah, I think part of it was changing the culture, and a culture change is never it's never done. But when we looked at the beginning, we didn't have a lot of focus on results. We didn't have a lot of focus on it was getting, due to COVID, I think it was really getting through sort of the day to day, and keeping employees on board. I mean, after, about 3 months after I started, we went through and we did this assessment of where the company was and where we needed to go and who had left during COVID. And I thought we had things squared away. And then, the Great Resignation happened and we sort of started over again. So there were some challenges there, but the culture that we're really focused on building is sort of a three-pronged culture. One is meet your commitments, right? There has to be accountability to our commitments. If we make a commitment to a customer, if we make a commitment to an investor, if we make a commitment to the next guy in line that we're going to get something done, we have to meet that commitment, which means twofold, right? It means working hard, doing what you say, and it also means be cautious in what you commit to. And that's been particularly important as we've looked at, sales growth and where are our opportunities for growth. There's a lot of, in any business like this, there's a lot of opportunities to grow with greater risk. And we're trying to make sure that we're not taking on too much risk as we grow. Second element is, everybody in the organization has to be ready for change. And that's, really when you look at, we've had certain employees that have been with the company for 40 years. And if you've been in that situation, you know that change is tough. But change is inevitable. So how do we get people to the greatest extent possible ready for that change? The change process continues. You still have to go through a lot of different aspects to make a change successful. But just getting people to acknowledge that change is inevitable and we have to go through it. And here's where we're trying to go with the company.
And finally, did you achieve that through communication, or how did you achieve that, Bill?
Well, so it's a lot of communication. And so every time we would launch a change, it's why, where are we going, and why are we making the change? How does it impact you? So there's a lot of communication around there. There's also a lot of modeling. So from leadership all the way down. When we talk about meeting commitments, it means that all of us have to do that. When we talk about customer satisfaction, it's not just sort of dropping the part off at the plant gate. Is the system up and running? Is the customer satisfied? Have we met our goals? And really kind of focusing on those things and making it a point of dialogue every single day, right? Because the final aspect of the culture is move quickly. In a turnaround situation or a situation like we had in LDX, time matters, right? And you can't observe a problem for too long. You've got to sort of make a decision and go. And you may have to course correct a little bit later, but helping, making those decisions, starting the execution. If you need to course correct or adjust, you've got to do that. But really helping people understand that, what's the old phrase, right? Bad news has to travel faster than good news, and bad news never gets better with time. So, it's if there's something going on, if there's an area of concern, if a project is going sideways, let's bring it up and tackle it up front. We've replaced almost our entire project management group across the whole organization. And when we look at project managers, most project managers on these types of projects are focused on, financials in the past. What have we done? What are our financial results today? And our goal is to change that perspective 180 degrees. We've got accounting systems and project accountants that can focus on what's happened in the past. We want our project teams to look down the road, right? Managing that customer relationship, identifying risks that are in the future, do we have a supply chain issue? Do we have a constructability issue? Do we have transit or transport issues, right? Looking down the road, identifying those risks, and then putting mitigation plans in place early so we don't sort of hit the wall and get bitten in the butt when we get there. So those are some of the how we sort of make this culture change more tactile for folks. It's in changing job descriptions. It's in hiring for certain skill sets that match where we're trying to go with the company, not necessarily what the last person was doing in their job. So that's
something.
No. So I think sort of addressing that culture has been a real big focus for us. It's never done, but as we continue to hire, as we continue to sort of upgrade some of the talent we have, we're going to keep focusing on that. Pivoting back to a customer engagement. If you're selling consumer goods, if you're selling widgets, you're not necessarily directly engaged with the customer experience. We sell custom engineered large capital projects. You need to make sure that customer is part of that process. And at the end of the day, you've met your performance guarantees, you get your final payment, there's a level of satisfaction from the customer, so that we can get back in there and work with them. And so that's, really making sure that the everybody on the team is engaged with that customer satisfaction. Happy customers pay on time, right? Unhappy customers don't. And so, we're running a business, but we're there because of the customers. So we spent a lot of time with our folks out at customer plants. It's changing sort of the culture from what happens inside our offices to what happens at the customer's plant site, because that's where success is defined. And that's important when we have, engineers or drafters or people that aren't necessarily connected to the end product. And so, we talked about culture, we talked about changing to sort of this customer focus, and then really accountability. It's whether it be at the worker level or at the leadership level, how do we align incentives? How do we align performance reviews? How do we align areas for growth? Because we're constantly looking across our portfolio, where can we grow the business? Where are the avenues to grow it at the appropriate level of risk? So those are the kind of things that I've been focusing on a lot, certainly in the last 6 or 7 months. Integration is never complete. Customer engagements can always be better. We're constantly looking at sort of upgrading the talent, but that's sort of where I've been focusing on.
And because some of your operate, believe you got one operation abroad, and you've got different plants in fairly spread out locations. I mean, I'm guessing that's brought its own challenges as well, has it?
Yeah, we have a great team in Spain. Our business leader in Spain, when I first came on board, I asked him sort of, what's your sales territory? And he said, I cover from the East Coast of the US to the West Coast of the US, but the other way around. Right. So he viewed his territory as everything outside of, the continental US. And he and his team have been outstanding in taking care of that business. I'll give a little bit of a plug here. I talked before about project management, and as a project company, that really makes or breaks the company. And we did an assessment of all of our project managers about 4 months ago. And our best project managers, our 4 best project managers, we have 2 in Spain, 1 in Eugene, and 1 in Georgia, and they're all women. And I don't know why, but they have been outstanding in helping to make sure we meet our commitments and get to customer satisfaction. And I got to say, I would not want to go toe to toe with some of these folks, because they are very, very good at what they do. So that's been a real positive. And some of that started with role modeling from the Spanish office. That's where the first 2 really stellar project managers were identified. And the office in Spain covers, currently we're doing work in Colombia, Turkey, India, Scandinavia, Portugal, Spain, France. So it's kind of all over, mostly in Europe, but also some work down in Central America.
I mean, obviously there's an increasing emphasis within companies on diversity. I mean, is that something that you guys have been focused on, or because your industry is not necessarily recognized for tremendous amount of diversity, shall we say?
Yeah. The organization is so, and I'll be sort of blunt here. You have to say that you support diversity, and we do, but we really focus on performance. Our organization in Georgia is perhaps the most diverse organization I've ever been a part of, whether that be gender or race or any of the sort of metrics that we face. And it had that was nothing to do with me. That's just the skill sets that reside in that office. And so we really look at who's performing and who can we advance, and if they've got the right toolkit, we're going to advance them as fast as we possibly can, without getting them personally overextended. But it's not we don't have set targets for it internally. Sure. The good news is it's happening sort of organically and naturally.
So do you feel that you have the sort of the recognition and the processes to sort of promote internally? I mean, is there a path? Is there a sort of career path for people typically? Or?
Well, yeah. So we're a very flat organization, and as we look at sort of the way we've reorganized, it continues to be very flat across the 4 market-facing segments. So a lot of advancement is demonstrated by, or is recognized by, greater challenges, greater recognition inside the organization. We have, where there's opportunities, we will promote from within. Most of the leadership positions we filled from the outside, just given the need to get the right bodies in seats as quickly as we can. But going forward, we've identified, 4 or 5 ambitious, very, very hardworking, and very, very high-performing individuals that are ready for, we believe, are or will be ready for the next step very, very soon. And that is a very diverse group. So, we don't target based on that. We don't sort of reward based on that. We want to see folks really, really thrive in the organization and the position that they have.
Right.
I don't know if that's a politically correct answer or not, but
yeah, no, it's helpful. Now, just turning the spotlight on you for a moment, Bill. So what do you think you've really got from a development perspective personally from this whole experience, or this ongoing experience?
So a real great appreciation of the people aspect. Sort of when you jump into a new position, at least in my experience, leadership team, processes, customers, right? That's sort of the top level. Understanding, and a lot of this was driven home due to the restrictions from COVID, is what's underneath the surface. So that's, I think, Charlie, you had referred to me a certain way a couple of years ago, but sort of rounding off some of those corners and helping to appreciate how to get everybody motivated for the team, for where we're trying to go. We had we've come through some really dark times, but we had a great 2022. We booked the largest order in company history. We started 2023 with the largest backlog that the organization has ever had. We've got some multi-stage projects with customers. So, a lot of the things that we were looking at, ability to perform against expectations, customer satisfaction, meeting our commitments, that's really starting to pay off now. And that's been very gratifying. We've changed out the entire leadership team. Some positions we've changed more than once, but I'm really, really happy with the team we have in place today. Not only are they focused on their goals, but they work very, very well with each other, and they're very mutually supportive as they go forward. And we're starting to have fun in the organization. We're doing a lot more celebration and recognition, really continuing to build up that energy level in the organization as we go forward. So I'm looking forward to 23.
Excellent. So for anyone who was thinking of doing something similar to yourself, taking a plunge into maybe a private equity owned, company, either, some sort of C-level position, is there any advice you would give them?
Yeah, well, first off, if you're ready to work really hard, really long hours with a lot of stress, but you want ownership, do it, right? I mean, it's with private equity, decisions happen very, very fast. There's no bureaucracy to go through. So if there's a good idea, typically, if you can outline the financial rewards, you're going to get the go ahead to do it. So that's a great way to drive change and see results very, very quickly. I'd suggest asking better questions. Earlier you had asked sort of what would I do differently. I think one of the lessons I learned was I assumed that I knew more about the business than I did. And so that sort of inhibited some of the questions that I asked up front. I don't think it would have made any difference as far as taking the position. But then once I was with the company, I probably should have been digging deeper into every area of the business. In a small company, in a private equity backed company, you don't have a large staff. Answers are not easy to come by. You really need to dig in and when you get one answer, ask another question, right? And look under every single rock. When we thought that our major challenge was in project management or execution, and then we got that sort of squared away, it turned out we had a technology issue someplace, and we really hadn't paid a lot of attention to that. So that sort of sprung up at an inopportune time. So, once you get your leadership team in place, really focus on asking those questions, digging deep, travel to every site, meet everybody. But it's great, once you're there.
Brilliant.
But it is a lot of time. It is a lot of work.
Excellent. Thank you, Bill. Look, I wanted to open the floor to some questions. Bob, I know you had a question you put in the chat. Do you want to throw that at Bill?
Oh, yeah, I have to read it. Bill, is there any difference with your thinking, execution, etc., from your previous operation roles and now that you're PE based?
Time. The biggest issue is time and systems. When I was with FLS, and I was there for, like I said, almost 30 years, large global organization, you generally have good systems in place to get the information that you need. And nothing moved really, really quickly. In private equity, they say days are much more important than weeks or months. So it's being able to move really, really quickly. And really, how do you once you identify the type of information that you need, how are you going to get it? Because the systems don't exist typically, especially in the mid-market where we're looking at companies that typically sole proprietorships or family businesses. They might have a system of accounting that doesn't match what we're expecting to go forward. They haven't necessarily been tracking performance and costs the way that we would like to see that going forward. So really recognizing that you have to find different ways to get that information.
Got it. Thanks.
But a lot less bureaucracy.
Bill, kind of following along that same train of thought then, right? So once you've identified what information you need, kind of what are kind of the lessons learned or the mistakes to avoid in how to get that, and then, putting the systems in place to get that.
Yeah. So Wendy, and again, Wendy and I worked together for a long time. In a past life, we spent a lot of time building dashboards for the organization, and most metrics, most dashboards are rearward looking. They're the past. What is your financial performance? What's your safety record? What's your schedule adherence, right? Much more important is forward-looking metrics. We're about to roll out a new CRM for the entire organization. And that, once we have that CRM in place, we'll be able to look at the pipeline in a much more granular level. We'll be able to vet and understand, where are we successful? Where are we not successful? Are we chasing projects we shouldn't be chasing because we have a low chance of winning those? That's data that's just not available today. And it's hard to see what's going to happen. As we look at sort of the US and the global economy, I don't think anybody has a real good feel for what's going to happen in the next 12 months. There's a lot of ideas. So as you start looking at scenario planning and you're looking at, what are the different possible outcomes, how are you going to respond to those? And what's the likelihood that those are going to happen? So what are those forward-looking metrics? What does the sales pipeline look like? Is when we do project review meetings every 2 weeks, what are the risks we're going to see down the road? Not just what we've done in the past, but what are we doing going forward? And that's what gives you sort of the visibility at where the business is going to be. As we look at new business ventures, there's a lot of lot of industries that are growing quickly around the EV space, around microchips and others. How can we play a part in that? And who are the key players, and how do we get engaged and contribute and generate profit from that?
Bill, Georgine.
Hey, Georgine.
A couple questions. So you had the 3 legacy companies plus all the different geographic cultures.
Mm-hmm.
And you said culture was one thing you wish you would have put a little more attention, or you focused it in a better focus. How did you guys overcome all that? Because having merged 4 into 1 and they were all domestic, there are definitely issues that come along when you're dealing with all that.
Yeah. So I went to one of the locations and I met with all of the key people there. And they each spent 90% of the time we were together talking about how the old business way was better, right? Or what we used to do in the past, or what's been taken away from them. And I had to be blunt with that office and say, you're carrying around like a bag of ashes. It's not going to change. We're not going to go back. Don't blame the private equity company. Take it up with the former owner that sold the company, right? And it, in that case, had to be very, very direct and very blunt with them. And then as we reorganized, we sort of separated from the legacy company, separated from the location. And so that's really smoothed out as well. The acquisition that we did in 2021 was a really high performing team. Small company, they had been together for years and years and years. But the folks that have elevated in those positions in the leadership roles have been much more open to working together with the rest of the group and how do we work together moving forward. And then it's common systems and common visibility, right? It's when we look at the leadership individuals from each of those businesses, you've got individual accountability and you've got mutual accountability. And that mutual accountability means that everybody's got an oar and is rowing in the same direction.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll share, here's a sort of tactile example of sort of culture differences. Vaccines. So we have operations in Georgia, Eugene, Oregon, Seattle, and Ruston, Louisiana. And, in Georgia, don't trust anything. We're not going to do anything if you tell us we have to do it. In Seattle, it's very, very libertarian, right? We don't trust what we're hearing. In Louisiana, it's a substantial group of African-American workers who also are not very trusting in the vaccine. So really, when we looked at, we had to get our folks vaccinated because our customers required that to come onto their sites. But we were tackling 3 different types of objections to the vaccine. And so that took a little bit of finesse. Ultimately, we had the same challenge, right? We needed to get our folks vaccinated, but we had to approach it differently. But by talking about why, as a company, we needed to do it, we were able to get through that.
Okay, I have a second question. So also you talked about private equity and you had to hire a CFO. Did they let you do that without having influence, being that numbers is part of the game?
Yes, so we did the recruiting within the company, and full disclosure, we're actually on our second CFO since I've been there.
Okay.
The CFO has a dual reporting line in private equity. They report to the CEO and they also report to the board of directors, to the investors. So no hiring decision was made without engaging our investors, and that's fully appropriate, right? But we were out looking for the right fit for our business. And for us, the pool of folks that we can go after is somewhat limited because we use sort of progress-based revenue recognition. So it's not a typical sort of I ship it and I can recognize revenue. We do it based on earnings each month and when we're recognizing revenue. So that's a skill set that sort of narrows the pool of potential CFOs.
Okay. That was my question. Exactly. Because it's a dual role. So, So you've had a good challenge with even having 2 CFOs.
Yeah. Well, the one we hired we pulled actually a guy out of retirement in 2021. And, I think after about a year, he said, this is a sort of a longer row to hoe than I would have that I bought into. And he was great. And he was great in supporting the transition. But then we went out and found somebody else who's local to our office in Georgia, great experience. And he's really been the backbone as we've looked at some of the systems integrations, right? And that's been very nice that he's been willing to run with that.
Okay. Sounds like he also fits culturally.
Yes. He speaks Georgian.
Good morning, Bill. Dawn Flickcraft. Kudos to you. Congrats on turning things around, because it sounds like you've really got things on the upswing now. I've kind of lived in this world with handling more than kind of 50 integrations in my lifetime. So question for you though, relative to, it sounds like that 2021 time span, where you were really in the trenches, turning over those rocks. It sounds like you had to garner support because financially a lot of investing was happening, right? Your numbers, bottom line probably wasn't as good. You were upscaling positions. Did you have to put milestones and or some kind of plan to your investors, to your board to get that support? Or were you just able to kind of run forward, and how did you handle that? And then were you able to utilize that with your employee base as well?
Yeah, so Dawn, that's a great question. And I would say that if I do it again, I'll be more organized in that first year. It was, at first it was triage, and it was working through some of the internal issues that we had. We had financial goals. We review those, monthly with our board of directors, our investors. And we're very clear with our leadership team on what those goals are. When we talk down at sort of down engaging lower in the organization, it's less about the financial goals. It's more about the project goals. We need to get this equipment to ship. And that's something much more tangible that they can touch. As we roll forward into 2022, then it was, we were talking about a new organization. We were talking about some investments. We were talking about, how do we see these investments paying off? And so, yes, now there's milestones for that, and there's an ROI, and we track and report out on those on a routine basis. And we're continuing to look at what are the next steps for the organization. We found that individuals, don't necessarily respond very, very well to, pure financial metrics. It's got to be something that's tangible to them. But we rolled out, spot reward programs. We've rolled out, in our manufacturing areas. We're looking at a new, safety incentive program. How do we get folks aligned with the goals that we have in their areas of responsibility?
Hey, Bill, Maxine Dodseth. Really some inspiring leadership and growth examples here. I was curious about, the markets as you look at these forward-looking metrics. Where do you see the most traction for some of the offerings that you're focused on in the market?
Yeah, so first of all, the biggest chunk of our business is air pollution control, and the old joke is nobody wakes up in the morning happy because they get to buy an air pollution control piece of equipment, right? It doesn't increase production, it doesn't increase profitability. It's sort of a tailpipe that you have to install and maintain. So our business is at its root, it's regulatory driven, but the regulations take years to roll out. So there's some visibility on where we see regulations coming. So then sort of the secondary drivers for that are new investments, where if a new plant's being built, there's going to need to be air pollution control or water preservation technology in it, and life cycle replacement. So, our equipment is in difficult environments. So, every 10 years or so, they need to be replaced and upgraded. And so keys for us is obviously we sort of benchmark what is legislation or EPA regulations that are coming down the road. There are some that, they're in the comment period today. And, those would probably turn into investments by customers in 2 years. We're also focused on, and actually a big driver for us has been sort of capital expansion in the building material space, as they've been looking at capacity expansion. Wood pellets, which is in very, very high demand in places like Asia and Europe, has been a tremendous growth avenue, but not sure what that's going to look like in a year or two. And so now we're looking at, how do we get involved in some of the longer term secular growth industries? We talked about maybe rare earth mining, microchips, battery recycling. Is there a place for us to be competitive there? And is it, what would the return look like in that period of time?
Yeah. Wow. Great. If I might just ask a culture question as well. You talked a little bit. I loved how you said, don't blame the private equity firm, and maybe how that moved the needle. So with the employees and the leaders that had been there the longest, would you say there was a certain percentage that just embraced the culture and moved forward? And maybe what percentage stayed stale or moved on from an attrition standpoint?
Yeah, I would say it was a very low percentage that adapted to where we were trying to go.
Yeah.
I think there's only 2 people that are still there in leadership positions that were there 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So again, in the idea that how quickly can you move, give everybody a chance, be very, very clear in where we're trying to go, engage in that process. But if we can't get there, let's move quickly.
Yeah. Well, your statement about days, not weeks and months resonates there. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Maxine.
Any other questions from anyone for Bill? No, I think you've answered everything, Bill. I really want to thank you, Bill. That was a great insight into your little journey down in Georgia. So really appreciate you taking the time, and it's great to see you back at a Beacon meeting.
Well, it's great to see all you folks. One thing that we didn't talk about was, should you relocate for a position like this?
Well, I'll answer that then, Bill.
And it's a personal choice. For us, it worked out well. We had, I commuted for the first year. It was sort of a condition that I had to relocate within the first year. So I commuted for that first year. I kind of really thought it was a 50-50 chance I'd still be here at the end of that. So, we took our time, but our kids at that point had moved out and graduated from college and gotten jobs. And, we moved down here, and I will say it's worked out very, very well. So there's always hesitance to moving. Moving is a pain, but this has turned out relatively well.
Beacon is the premier executive networking organization serving the Mid-Atlantic region. To learn more, go to beaconforlife.org.